South Africa's biggest step towards decarbonizing Eskom, its struggling state-owned power utility. Notoriously known as Africa's worst polluter and locally resented for poor performance. South Africa has committed to reach net zero status by 2050 and phase out the use of all its coal-fired power stations, except Medupi and Kusile, within 20 years. At full capacity, Komati's 237 permanent workers and 600 contractors produce 1,000 megawatts of power per day. Now, the plant is shut down as the country faces 10 hours of power cuts daily. 150 permanent employees remain, working on repurposing the site to generate 370 megawatts through solar, wind, and battery power. And most importantly, to create new jobs. This documentary was produced with support from the Earth Journalism Network.
We recognize as Eskom that climate change is a reality. We need to address it. We are fully supportive of the country's nationally determined contribution targets in terms of net zero by 2050. We are offering a second life to the power station. And by that we mean that the economic activity that stemmed out of the power station continues, but to a larger scale, right? In terms of the employment opportunities in the province, in terms of employment from renewables, whether it's manufacturing across the value chain.
South Africa is the 14th largest carbon emitter in the world, the first in Africa, much of which Eskom is to blame for. By 2030, it hopes to halt the annual increase in the emissions percentage. But just 1 hour away, Eskom's move towards a greener future is taking a different turn in the opposite direction, towards more pollution in the face of crippling blackouts. While Komati was preparing to shut down, disaster struck at one of Kusile's chimneys. A massive buildup of slurry caused the collapse of the flue gas duct, or FGDs, an adaptive technology that keeps out harmful sulfur emissions. While the emissions at Kusile are sulfur and not carbon, they do pose a major concern regarding ambient air pollution in the area, which South Africa has also committed to cutting down.
There's a great amount of slurry that is sitting there, about 1,500 tons or so. So they need to remove that before they can get an appreciation of what that is. So in our conversation here, they did ask for time to say that we are looking at that. So they need to hear that and ensure that they give us figures that are, if you like, close to being accurate.
The FGDs are a unique installation that were integral to Kusile securing the license to operate. In response to the collapse, the Environment Minister received an application by Eskom to bypass the FGDs and agreed to shorten timeframes for public consultations about its effects. And Minister Barbara Creasy admits it was one of the hardest decisions she's had to take as minister in that portfolio.
I did say at the time it was one of the most difficult decisions that I've had to make in this portfolio. And the reason is because one had to look at a short-term increase of emissions that will obviously impact on communities surrounding Kusile. One had to balance that with the devastating impact that load shedding generally is having on all human lives in our country.
She also doesn't deny the political pressure put on her to do so.
I'm a South African. I live in this country. Every single day, we see the devastating impacts that load shedding is having on our economy and on human lives. And I believe that when you are faced with a crisis, it's no good grumbling. If you have an opportunity to help, to solve that crisis, you have to do that.
6 months later, temporary smokestacks that will cost 260 million rand are under construction. They will stand at 180 meters tall. That's nearly 60 meters shorter than the previous chimneys that failed, and will bypass the sulfur filters.
The chimney is a secondary problem. Your primary problem is the issues around the chemical process that happens in the FGD. So the casualty of that exercise is the chimney, and because we wanted to protect life, we are not sure about its structural integrity. That's why we requested for a bypass from the FGD so that we go straight to the stakes and we are able to emit.
More worryingly, Kusile's general manager says they may need to redesign the FGDs.
as is, when we have a problem on the FGD, we have to shut down the unit. So we have looked with the engineers to say what else can we do to improve that reliability and maintainability for better performance.
This means that while South Africa trudges along on its winding path to net zero, Kusile's future may bring a grave and costly decision to Eskom's front door. Back to Komati. Eskom emits a total of 206 million tons of carbon through its coal-fired power station fleet. Komati used to emit nearly 900,000 tons of carbon. That's now been cut down to zero. In October 2022, South Africa received a World Bank loan of $439 million to decarbonize it. It plans to use this money to create new jobs and industries in renewable energy for workers affected by the plan to move away from coal.
The jobs that we create from a country perspective, in terms of the construction and installation, in terms of the operations and maintenance, but also if you were to include certain components across the value chain that you could manufacture locally, it does create that opportunity. So last year we had a training in intervention where we trained the power station staff in terms of opportunities in renewables to show to them what potential, what possibilities there are.
At Komati, the plan is in its infancy, but there are already indicators of what this might look like. Its generating capacity will be significantly diminished once the transition to renewables is complete. To make up for this, Eskom plans to turn Komati into a training facility and hub for microgrid development.
You have your inverter and your battery chargers here on the rack, as well as a whole lot of control systems that are in these two orange boxes. And basically what it does is it can provide off-grid electricity, and it has got remote engineering capability. So you know what that means? It means that you can dial in remotely and do modifications and resets of the system without actually driving out hundreds of Ks.
The first step is through creating sustainable solar projects, such as agrivoltaics, which pairs solar power generation with fish and vegetable farming.
I was at Kusile from coal-fired, but I grabbed the opportunity for this transition to go to the new future of the solar power transition from coal-fired power station.
The pilot project is run by Mandisa Sekela of Agrivoltaics.
Agrivoltaics, it's a concept of where you have agriculture and then you have solar panels. That's that combination. And then what we are using that concept for is we want to both benefit of solar panels yielding energy, and also we wanted the crops in a small space. The aquaponics, which we see here in this agrivoltaic stand, it's where we have the fish that excretes nitrates to the water. We have fertilized water. This water we circulate through the crop so that it grows.
Mpumalanga has got a lot of prime agricultural land. It's competing with mining land, it's competing with power station land, and as the station is shut down, you don't want to start now expanding your footprint and taking away from the agricultural land. The agrivoltaics facility allows us to match and reach that nexus in terms of balancing the food, energy and water crisis in a single installation, in a single site, where you have energy generation, you have agricultural activities, and in a water-scarce country like South Africa, it reduces significantly the amount of water that we use in terms of crops.
The system you saw here, it's a demo system, and we're looking at a bigger project that we're going to go to the market next year in 2024. So this system, we're going to look at the lessons learned on the energy yield and also on the crop that will benefit. So that when we install the 100 megawatt solar plant there, we also install the aquaponics agrivoltaic system, and that will benefit the community. They need to form small enterprises, co-ops, so that they plant the crop for their own benefits. They will be trained on that business aspect.
But what about the jobs? This is the big question that's raised doubts about South Africa's commitment to a just energy transition. And this is why the Environmental Ministry declared renewable zones in Mpumalanga.
We did that because what we found is that if you look at the cost benefit of establishing solar in Mpumalanga, yes, there isn't quite as much sunshine as there is in the Northern Cape, but we've got the transmission grid in Mpumalanga. So if you have to look at the cost-benefit, that availability of the transmission grid outweighs the added value you would get from placing your installations in the Northern Cape.
Mantashe has previously argued that there is nothing just about the number of jobs he describes as being destroyed at Komati. According to Mantashe, it's not just, it's simply an energy transition. Komati scaled down its permanent workforce from 237 employees to just 150. Most of the employees who left were transferred to other nearby coal-fired power stations that are still operational. Just over a dozen were reskilled, such as Lerato Matebula.
Oh, it was quite exciting because we're excited to be reskilled into a new field because I was a production manager for about 4 to 5 years. So now to come into this as a construction manager, it was quite an interesting thing, but it's mostly similar.
She admits there are serious reservations among her colleagues about getting reskilled to work on solar or wind power.
Yeah, I must say that people, they are a bit skeptical, but to me it is positive because of we need the support, and also the community needs the support. And it is nice because of back in the days, Komati closed before, and then it was stuck. But now at least there's still movement, and the community is getting hope that there is something happening and they are getting jobs.
Then there are the contract and subcontract workers. These are semi-skilled and unskilled jobs, which were responsible for creating employment in the surrounding areas.
No one is happy. We are not happy. Because majority of people, they were artisans, semi-skilled. We know the older ways of doing things. We were not even given a chance to go and study or do other things. Then we just continue with the new way. So now it's like you sleep today, you wake up tomorrow, you are no longer Carlos, you are just someone else with a different things to do. So it's a problem. It's a big challenge for the community.
Agrivoltaics has found a way to keep the jobs available to some of them.
Yeah, there are opportunities, but if you want to get those opportunities, you have to be open-minded, and then it's not a simple job, and then it's just an easy job, but you have to open your mind if you are dealing with this job. People are looking for work and for everything, but now they don't believe in what we are doing now.
Eskom promises these jobs will multiply and eventually extend to other power stations.
We also intend building climate-smart agricultural technologies like a greenhouse at Grootplay Power Station, which is one of our subsequent power stations that will be shut down. The learnings from there will inform the larger rollout, not just in terms of Eskom power stations, but the province as a whole, in terms of job creation, in terms of economic growth and development, in terms of diversification of employment, of economics.
Despite the concerns about job losses, the power utility is adamant no one will be left behind.
It's more than just a coal-fired power station that's transitioning from an energy perspective. It is key in terms of the socio-economic imperative that we have. It's an obligation that we have as an organization as well to make sure that no one is left behind in the transition.
In Komati village, former coal miners are seen sitting on corners throughout the day, hoping to find a piecemeal job. They describe the shutting down of Komati as a decimation of their livelihoods. Eskom's official community liaison officer for the community says things are getting worse.
I can say it's quite a surprise, my guy, because not everyone is happy about it. So it becomes difficult for us, especially here, because this shop here, it used to be cheap because most of the people, they buy here from Power and other places. But once they've closed, now they have to top up the prices to meet their standards and everything.
And the government is clear. While it needs to address the power crisis, it cannot avoid implementing its just energy transition plans and meeting those targets. But the Presidential Climate Commission has warned that even if every coal job is replaced with a renewable job, the unemployment rate in coal mining towns in Mpumalanga will still average at close to 80%.
We made recommendations on the just transition that was handed over to government last year. And, crucially, the reason we focused on the just transition was that we wanted to look at the economic and social consequences of the climate transition and look at a proactive policy that seeks to ensure that this transition is equitable, that both the risks and the opportunities in the transition are equitably shared.
The prospect of other towns in Mpumalanga facing a similar fate to Komati after the decommissioning happens ignited panic among ordinary workers at coal mines. That was until the president announced a delay in the plans due to South Africa's crippling power crisis that led to 10-hour power cuts.
The manner in which these commitments are implemented must not compromise our national interest, such as energy security or the immediate priority of reducing load shedding. The NEC supports the approach that as we prioritize ending load shedding, we will need to revisit our decommissioning schedule to balance energy security and our climate commitments.
That announcement didn't faze Eskom's Just Energy Transition team.
We don't believe that it would have a significant impact or effect in terms of the 2050 targets. We believe that we are still on target, or we will still comply and meet even the lower ambitions of the 2030 aspirations as such in terms of reducing our carbon footprint.
Eskom's head of generation says South Africa can afford to delay the shutdown of coal plants, scheduled for 2025, because the utility has been underperforming anyway.
2025 was informed by IRP 19, which assumed a 75% availability, and then on that availability you will have higher levels of emissions. But if you take where the emissions are currently, while the strategy of net zero by 2050 is still in place, but the lower level of performance, it gives us fewer years to run this plant as well without compromising the whole overall net zero capacity of the thing. So yeah, the plant can run. Technically, it can run for as long as we have money to maintain it, they can run. But there is this competition of the net zero contribution from the fleet. That's what we are looking at as well as generation.
Since the government announced its plan to delay decommissioning, international partners of the JETP in South Africa have questioned whether the net zero targets of 2030 remain realistic. But South Africa's electricity minister believes the delay is simply unavoidable.
They've agreed to delay the decommissioning of those plants so that we continue to exploit them. We get the megawatts on stream and we get the South African economy going. We did say that that should not be misinterpreted as a deviation from our decarbonization agenda. We are not relenting on the nationally determined contribution, but we are saying we are sitting on an asset, we are faced with a crisis, so we need to exploit that asset to be able to resolve the crisis.
And the government is clear. While it needs to address the power crisis, it cannot avoid implementing its just energy transition plans and meeting those targets.
Are we able to meet our decommissioning objectives and at the same time meet our energy security objectives? Now, President Ramaphosa put out an interesting newsletter a few weeks ago where he said that we have to do both. Because what we understand is that not only does climate change pose a significant risk to our country, our physical infrastructure, our health, and so on, but we also face what we call the transition risk. And this is a situation where our major trading partners are already far down the decarbonization road and want to introduce tariffs and taxes that will ensure that their investments in green energy are protected from what they might perceive to be cheap goods and services coming from a high carbon environment.